No, son. What more can I ask of life? Yes, indeed, Dad. And then, during the time we were getting our passports ready, we set off for the United States. As I told you, your uncle helped me a lot when your little sister was born. He sent me money. Over in Westlaco, Texas, they were very kind to me at the hospital. I offered my labor. I offered to work off the cost of the medical bills. But they said, no, there's no need. You can pay whenever and however you can. I said, all right. But thank God your uncle sent me money. And with that, I went and paid off what was owed. Well, thank God. And here we are now in the United States. Yes, yes. What do you remember most about your arrival in the United States, Dad? Since you didn't know English, how did you figure things out in your first jobs? In my first jobs, as you know, I went into roofing. Right off the bat, I smashed my finger because my job wasn't nailing. My trade was something completely different. But I thank God for the people who gave me an opportunity. The late Tomasito, the late Emilio, and your uncle Jose. Well, he worked elsewhere. But thank God for the people who gave me a chance. You must always be grateful to the people who give you an opportunity, son. But I wanted something better for my children, to fight, something we don't like. Sometimes we don't like the work. Of course, it's hard. It is hard. That's why they call it work and not pleasure. Well, Dad, well said. I remember in roofing, the late Emilio, may he rest in peace, had just passed away. We were working on a 2-story house. Back then, shingles were made of wood. And I remember it was very early in the morning, and they said we had to climb up to the very top, the second floor. I was barely getting up when I slipped. I thought that was the end for me, and I screamed, please. There was no safety equipment. I wasn't tied off. I was on the second floor with absolutely no protection. Nothing, Dad? No ropes? Nothing like that? Nothing at all. And I knew that if I fell from that height, I would kill myself. But a hand reached out and grabbed me by my shirt just as I was slipping down the ladder. That's when I stopped. Thank God. Thank God. And Dad, what did you realize then? Did you say no more? No, I didn't. I didn't say that this job isn't for me. I didn't say that. But then your uncle told me to see your uncle Rogelio, who we should try to visit while you're here in McAllen. Yes. When he saw my finger, it was completely smashed. He said, no, this is over. But even so, I never stopped working because I would stand right there and nail with my other hand. I needed to bring some money home. Well, I went with him, but I had only come by myself at first to test the waters. Yes, Dad? You didn't jump in with everyone all at once? You came to test the waters, as they say? Yes, to test the waters and learn, to understand. I said, where am I going to house my family? How am I going to do this? All these questions. Well, honestly, my cousin Rogelio said, come on, I'll take you tomorrow. But out of respect, I would sleep right by the front door of a little makeshift bed, always with my face to the wall, since we were sharing a small space, out of respect for the space between him and his wife. Out of respect. Whenever I had free time, I would go and wash my clothes. Well, it was fine. Days passed, and then I rented a place elsewhere so everyone can have their own privacy. To have some privacy, right, Dad? Yes, absolutely, privacy. I respect them a lot, and I love them because they gave me a huge helping hand when I first arrived to the United States. Then I started working there with them. I told him, give me a sledgehammer and a drill, and we started working. Later on, we went back to Mexico. During that interval, I brought you all over. I worry far more about milk for you and taking care of you guys than about myself. We worked in construction and I learned a lot. So, Dad, did you have a car
¿Y usted
when you
iba,
went
tenía
to
su
the
propio coche cuando iba a
construction
construcción
sites?
o cómo se
No, no, I didn't have anything yet. I got around with the help of other people like cousin Rogelio, who had a truck. He would support me with that, and we would pay for rides. I remember in the truck we
Ajá.
rode in, I would climb up and sit right on the edge of the truck bed because there were no seats left inside the cab. So, Dad,
So se
so you
sentaba
sat in
atrás
the
en la
back in
caja.
the truck
Ajá.
bed? Yes, in the truck bed. It had a
¿Iba solo
camper
usted
shell,
atrás o
but I
iba?
would climb in and sit there. Were you alone there in the back, Dad? No, no, there were about 8 or 10 of us. The truck was packed for work. On one occasion, one of my coworkers, who already knew how everything worked on the job, took away the best shovel I had. Since I was from the ranch, how was I supposed to know which tool was the best? So I just sat over to the side. A coworker did that? Yes, a coworker. They thought I was undocumented, that I didn't have papers. Well, I never told them who I was either. I just thought, it's fine, no problem here. Whatever the pickaxe had whenever a pickaxe had a loose handle or whatever, I was going to work. I didn't care. What I wanted was to earn a living. Dad, you wanted to contribute. Absolutely, to contribute so I could bring home some money. We would arrive at the gas stations every morning and they would say, "Hey,
Porque ellos
don't you like to
trabajaban
spend
en la
money?
gasolinera en la mañana,
Look at
tomaban
all this
café o
stuff,
chocolate, o las
chocolate, sweet
donitas o las
bread, and
cosas que
everything."
tienen en las tiendas.
Because they would get
Ahí
off the
en
gas station in the morning to buy coffee, hot
Ah,
chocolate, donuts, and whatever snacks the store had. That was their breakfast and lunch. But I already had food from home, thanks to my wife, who always prepared my breakfast and lunch. Well, that
y le
was
preguntaba
fine.
que usted por qué no
And
compraba
they
eso.
would ask you, why didn't you buy anything? Yes. So I told him, look, what I earn, I don't want to spend on myself because I have a little boy. My concern is my children. Your sister was older, but you were so small. So I said, that's why what I earn is not for me. I want it for my children. When you sacrifice for your kids, you say, no, I don't want anything for myself. Since he always tried to humiliate me, I just thought, it's fine. I don't have problems with anyone. That guy in the back of the bed. He was harsh, Dad. He was a bitter person. Yes, he was very aggressive with me.
Era un bully,
But he didn't
como
know that I
dicen
had
aquí
legal
en
papers
Estados
to
Unidos.
work in the United States. He didn't know who I was. Dad, he was a bully, as they say here in the United States. He was a
Los que
massive bully,
estaban
son.
con papeles en Estados
But when
Unidos
I
legalmente eran
immigrated,
los que no.
but when immigration showed up, that's when we all found out who was legally documented in the United States and who wasn't, right, Dad? The seal, you had the seal in the paperwork. Yes,
El sello.
to see if it was real or fake.
Si era verdadero o
He
falso.
said, okay, now you come over here, the immigration guy. Well, he had no papers to show them. Dad, he didn't have any. No, they put him right in the back of the transport van. They call it La Chirona. And another, and another, and another. About 3 or 4 of us were left. We went to the trailer where the tools were. A little while later, immigration came to the trailer again to investigate us. They investigated the one who were there and took them away if they didn't have papers. There was a young guy from Monterey who said, man, I'm already tired of working here. Let them take me back for free. They asked him if he had papers. He didn't have papers, but he wasn't afraid. And so they basically walked right up to them and they asked him, you got papers? And he said, yes, even though he wanted to go to Mexico for free. And they just left him there. Yes, they left him. He was so calm. because he spoke with absolute confidence. Wow, Dad, that's so funny. With confidence, and what he really wanted was a free ride back to Monterey. And he said, "Damn it, they didn't take me." Yes,
Ajá.
we were there and we saw it. And there was another older, dark skinned gentleman inside the trailer, all the way in the back. And
Pensaron
since it
que
was very
era un
early, it was still
afroamericano.
dark towards the back. And they looked at him, but saw his dark skin,
Estaba en la oscuridad.
and they figured he was African American. Dad, and so, yeah. Sometimes it, sometimes I guess it helps to be dark skinned. He was in the shadows, and so yeah, they just left him alone. Afterward, the bully came up to me and said, "Hey,
Ujú.
why didn't you tell me you had papers?" I said, "Why should I? Do I have to report to you? I'm doing
Y
fine,
le
and
enseñé
that's
que
all that
pedía
matters."
agua a un vecino ahí.
Around that time, they sent me to get water because I was the rookie. Go grab the bucket. So I went to fetch water. I had to ask a
No
neighbor for
sabía
water.
decirle en inglés.
It was a neighbor
Usted.
near the construction site, an American woman. She came out and gestured, "What do you want?" And I didn't know how to say it in English.
Y no sabía
"Dad,
ni,
you
sa-
didn't?"
ni pedir agua.
"No, I didn't know
Nomás con
anything,
una
son.
cubeta
The most
y ya,
essential thing here is knowing how to ask for
ya se
water.
dio cuenta
And
de
I
que
didn't even know
quería
how to do
agua.
that. I just had a bucket and made gestures with my hand. She realized I
Que
wanted
agua
water
de
and
botella
showed
ni
me the
nada, solo
outdoor
existía.
faucet. I brought it back to them. There was no bottled water back then as there is now. That didn't exist. And we
Para
didn't
pedir
even
agua.
get sick. Now people get sick more easier than before. Imagine that. I brought them the water and they said, "Hey, how did you manage to ask for water, Quintanilla?" I said, "I just gestured like this." And she told me the water was there. "Drink up." But the real blessing was when I got to work at the Richmond tank.
Sí, sí.
That was great, thank God. Though I had my share of struggles getting in, I had to pass a physical exam. And thanks to the Molina family who helped me and took me there, I kept persevering to have a better life. You understand? When they gave me the job, they reprimanded me right after because I parked wrong. Since all I knew was tying my horse up anywhere, I just parked there.
Ajá.
And sometimes our own people are the harshest.
Ey.
It was a Hispanic guy. Now I asked him for help. He said, "That's your problem. That's where you parked." I said, "All right, do whatever you want with me." When they gave me the paperwork to go to the doctor, I thought, how am I going to do this?
Sí.
That was a huge problem for me because I didn't know English, and the documentation was all in English. The person who drove me had pointed out generally where the clinic was, and I kept debating, should I go or not?
La clínica.
I had to make a decision. If I go right, I lose. If I go left, there is the clinic.
Sí.
I decided to try.
Ajá.
I didn't know how to fill out the application again because it was all in English, nothing in Spanish. I went to the window and the young lady spoke to me in English because I looked light
Sí.
light
Porque
skinned,
no
like
sabía
a
rellenar
güero.
la aplicación.
She thought I was
Sí, era
American.
en inglés.
I said, no, I don't speak English. She spoke Spanish, so I said, "I need help because I don't know how to do this." It is always better to speak the truth. Never pretend you know something when you don't. She said,
Es
"Okay,
americano.
as soon as I'm free, I'll help you." And I saw a guy there pointing at a form, and I thought, he knows Spanish. I went over and he asked,
Sí, sí, sí.
"Where are you going to work?" I said, "Here." He said, "I work there too." I asked, "Do you know English?" He said, "No, I don't know it either." So we were both in the same boat.
Mm.
But there was a kind young couple there, a brother and a sister.
Tampoco sabía.
Very noble people. And they helped me out. A very large man stood up, and I stood up too, thinking, oh no, is this another bully? Is he going to hit me? But they told him, no, he just doesn't know English. We are helping him.
Ajá.
He said, okay. What's your name? They fill out the form. Are you
Otro
sick with
bully.
anything? I said, I'm not sick with anything. I just want to work. Yes. I had a burning desire to work. I didn't come to this country expecting to be taken care of. No, sirree. I never even thought of that.
Ey,
I just came with a desire to work.
tenía ganas de trabajar.
So they filled out the
No
application.
llegó a este país con
And
eso
I
de que
took
me
it to the
mantengan.
lady. She said, all right, well, we'll call you in a moment. But I didn't know what they were going to do to me. I had never had a physical exam in my life, not in Mexico, not anywhere. They called me out, Mr. Quintanilla, and put me in a tiny room the size of a freezer. It was very small booth. There was a very little window. And they put headphones on me
Sí, pues
for a
no,
hearing
nunca le
test.
habían hecho un físico. En toda su
And
vida.
I paid close
Bien,
attention because the technician gestured with his finger.
Eh,
Whenever I heard a sound, I had to raise my finger. Those sounds were so infinitely faint. I don't think an ant could even hear them.
ajá.
But I finished and sat
Se
back
iban a
there
hacer una audición.
wondering,
Ah,
what's next? So they called me again for x-rays. And
con el dedo.
I laid down on the table and they told me to hold my breath.
Que escuchaba,
All of a
cuando
sudden,
escuchara
the
el
machine
sonido, usted
started
levantaba el dedo.
buzzing.
Claro.
And I thought, oh no, they're going to find out that I'm completely broken, that I'm useless. But the technician gestured that everything was fine. They gave me my paperwork and said, you're good to go. Report to the company at 0700 in the morning. And I said, perfect. I don't like being late. So I showed up very, very early.
Ajá.
When I arrived, they handed me a broom. The supervisor said, all right, Quintanilla, we're going to pay you more later, but start with this. And I thought, this is exactly what I was taught to do on the ranch. I'm an expert at sweeping. This is easy. Compared to what I knew, this was a piece of cake. I swept everything, gathered the scrap metal, and did it easily. It was my specialty.
Mañana a trabajar.
So I don't know how many days I swept. But when they transferred me to the back section, I didn't know anything about that work. But I thought, go for it, Quintanilla. Learn something new. And I didn't understand the language. Now that was the worst part. But I said,
Yo soy un
I'm not
experto.
going to give up. I have to
Esto es
support
fácil.
my wife
Para lo que yo-
and my
para lo
children.
que yo conozco, esto es fácil.
What will become
Y
of
me van a
them
pagar
if
más.
I give up? So I pushed forward. My coworkers were Americans. There were these massive 200-liter metal barrels that had to be flipped and rolled over the rails. And they gestured to me that those were my responsibility,
Aprende
that I
algo
had to
nuevo,
do them
algo nuevo.
all alone. And I thought, man, this is heavy.
Eso es lo peor. No
But
entender. No.
I'm not going to give up. So, as best as I could, I rolled them over the rails and stood on them and stood them up.
Exactamente.
My job was to pump a specific number of strokes of chemicals into the tanks for each section. The next day was the same. It was hard labor, son.
Ah,
Every
usted lo
single
tenía
day
que
that
hacer
I was
solo.
out there, it was hard labor. But the indoor foreman, Mr. Juan, now I don't know if he is still alive or not, but he ended up seeing me
Ajá.
working hard. And he told the front office, this man has a strong desire to work.
Ajá. Ajá.
This man, he is going to produce for this company. So Juan told me, hey, Benito, when you finish your shift, I don't want you to clock out. I need you to come with me. So he showed me a grading machine, and he told me, I need you to clean it. Now, that was very easy for me.
Yeah. Este va a producir.
I started to watch how they did things, and I became very observant of all the things that they were doing. And I learned how to grind and how to weld. He taught me the English word grind, weld, and clean.
Ujú. Aprendió a granear también.
And he told me, tomorrow I want you to come in at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Ay,
He said, clock in
para limpiar.
and I'll take care of the rest. At 700 a.m., you can go to your regular job with the barrels so that I could do that. When night came, I would walk home alone.
Ajá. A
But
las
the day
barricas.
came when one of the American workers was absent because there was two American workers that were helping each other with the barrels, and I was left alone to care for another portion of barrels all by myself without any assistance from them.
Faltó un americano.
But I was ready.
De los dos.
No matter what challenge came, I was going to tackle it. And I saw that the remaining American coworker couldn't lift the barrels by himself
Es que sí eran.
because these barrels were incredibly heavy as they were full. And so I gestured to him that I could help him because two are better than one, especially in marriage.
Ey.
It takes two. He said, we are going to help you two from here on out. That was the moment they realized that they also needed to help me. They saw that despite my
Ahí es
limitations,
cuando ellos
I
se
was
dieron cuenta
willing
de que, hey,
to
ellos
help
también
them.
tenían que ayudarle a usted.
Because the three of us, the work became, or between the three of us, the work became much easier. They had to see me struggle first. But once they benefited from my help, they understood the secret of teamwork.
Tomó de que estuviera,
Then
se
I
fuera
started
uno o
focusing
fallara el día para que se diera
more
cuenta. Lo
on the
vieron
welding.
batallar
Wow,
desde
Dad,
antes.
that's incredible. It took
Desde que
them
comenzó.
to
Pero hasta
have
que
one of
ellos
the
se
Americans
beneficiaron,
not show up for them
cuando
to
dijeron,
realize
"Ay, fíjate."
just the importance of this teamwork. Yes, son, absolutely. But then I started focusing more on welding. Since there was a union, a man named Mr. Garza, may he rest in peace, and an American lady who ran the union helped me a lot. My coworkers who had been there a long time started suffering from these tremors because they had been exposed to the chemicals.
Ajá.
And I looked at them and realized, hey, these chemicals are bad for your health. This is probably going to be your ticket
Comenzaron a
out of
sufrir
here.
de-
So the union
temblores.
representatives came and they looked at their trembling hands and they decided to transfer me to the machine shop to protect me from the chemicals as well. The head of the welders were thrilled to have me. He said, you are going to be a Tucker welder helper. I was paired with a black coworker, and that's when I really started practicing my welding. Later, they paired me with another worker who installed the stringers on
Ya no
top of
estaba
the train
expuesto a esos químicos
tanks.
malignos.
He was a very good man.
Ajá.
Whenever we had downtime, he would send me to fetch parts. I was quick and got them whatever they needed, and I started absorbing their techniques. I was doing great. It was easy.
Ajá.
But one day I decided to try welding the underside of the tank myself, and I ended up burning through the metal and making a huge hole. I was so upset with myself.
Ajá.
He wanted me to be quick and alert to bring whatever we needed for the next tank. During those times, I would watch how the professional welders worked. They welded beautifully,
Ujú.
and I started absorbing the techniques that they were using.
La técnica.
I did it just like them on the easy flat welds. It was a piece of cake. But one day, I said, no, I'm going to test myself on the underside. You aren't supposed to do that right away. Sure enough, I left a bunch of slag and burned a big hole in the metal, like I previously said. And the supervisor was furious with me. I slipped away underneath the tanks. He yelled, I'm going to tell the foreman what you did. I said, go ahead and tell him. Now that you've caught me. And I went back to my station. Sometimes I would sit around when we didn't have tanks, but I used that time to learn. Of course, Dad, because you were hired as a helper to the tack welder, and you used those moments to practice. Yes, I was practicing. I wasn't about to just sit there idly. I wanted to learn. I wanted to become someone. The easy parts I could handle perfectly. Then the day came when I met another guy whose name was Benito, a very good person. He asked me, do you want to learn? I said, yes, that's exactly what I want. I told him, I didn't just come here to stand around. I want to learn. You know how the train tanks are round? He said, okay, look, for this curve, you use this welding rod. And this is how you adjust the heat on the machine. Learn how to set the heat on the machine. I said, got it. He added, but first, clean the area. Use your wire brush, clean it well, and then lay down your weld. I left it spotless. He looked at it and said, hey, for a beginner, you're doing great. I said, excellent. I'm starting to learn. I kept working with my black coworker. Now, he used to swear a lot. He was wild, but we got along just great.
Claro.
Since I wasn't a Christian back then, if he threw a curse word out at me, I'd throw it right back at him. That was what I could understand. Curse words are the very first things you learn in the new language. He'd swear at me, and I'd swear right back. He'd say to me, Benito, you don't speak English, do you? I'd say, I don't know. He'd say, yes, you do. What happened next was that they needed welders for the night shift. Another worker who had clocked in before me signed up. He was in a different department, but they did more welding there. He signed up, and so did I. They gave him the position first, but after 2 days, they called me. Now, Don Alonso, if he is still alive, may God bless him. He was a very good person to me. He called me over, Quintanilla, let's go. Step up. I said, what's the test? I took the test, and since I had already practiced with him, he looked at my weld and said, whoa, this is beautifully laid. He really liked my welding. He said, this is very good. But now I want you to weld underneath the tank. And I didn't know that. It was more complicated. You had to hold a completely different position. And since I didn't know anything about that, well, of course, Dad, they hadn't taught you. No, not at all. I hadn't even watched closely. I would just walk by and glance at it, but I didn't really pay attention to the underside. This is going to be really tough. Well, all right. And since the supervisor would also look through his welding hood to watch you as you welded, man, as soon as I lowered my hood, it looked like a rattling rattlesnake shaking. I kept trying over and over, and the gentleman said, "This is completely useless. You weren't in the right position or using the right technique, Dad." No, no, not yet. But another friend came along whom I had met. I always made friends with the welders because I wanted to learn from them. And he said, "What's up, cousin?" And I said, "No, man, I didn't make the cut. I don't know how." He told me, "Look, in this position, you place yourself like this, and you strike the arc, and you keep moving it along carrying the weld. And that is the way, that's the technique. When you weld this way, you have to square yourselves up like this. You almost have to tuck yourself right into the wheels." I said, "All right." Then the old man left because that's what they called Don Alonso. They didn't like him because he was very scolding, though he never scolded me, so I can't say anything bad about him. So my friend said, "Look, I'm going to go to the restroom. This side where you were working is going to be my side. That way, whatever mistakes you make, I will fix it." Well, I understood exactly what he told me. I started laying a very good bead, filling it perfectly until one rod after another, using one rod after another. Suddenly he tapped me. I whipped off my helmet. "What happened?" He said, "The old man has been watching you, Mr. Alonso, Don Alonso. He was observing you, Dad?" He said, "Really? You didn't realize?" I said, "No, I was completely focused on what I was doing." He said, "Man, go back to your station. I'll do the tacking so I can help you out." Well, that passed, and later Don Alonso said to me, "Quintanilla." I said, "Yes, Don Alonso." He said, "You're a good welder now. I want you to come work the night shift. Give it your all." He saw your willingness, Dad. He saw your desire, your drive to learn, the hunger. Yes, the hunger to learn. I wanted to improve my life. I wanted a better future for my children. And that's when I bought you your first hamburger, son. Truly, that one I brought you with my first paycheck, Dad, and that's why I love hamburgers to this day. Yes, son. I didn't raise you with bad habits. You just like them, and you still do. So then my pay went from $4 to $6 an hour, and the boss said, "I want you to show up at 2 in the afternoon," even though starting time was at 3:30 or 4. He told me, "Come in early. You come in early for me." I said, "All right." But then they point out the rules. The union did it. And I said, "What do you want me to do? The boss tells me to show up at this time. I clock in at this time, and I come to work. I didn't do anything else." The union rules said, though, that we had to start at 3:30 or 4:30, but I was showing up 2 hours earlier in some cases, ahead of the union rules, Dad. Yeah. I told him, "Look, I don't know. Talk to the boss. I didn't know anything about union." The boss wanted me to prepare the tank so that when the crew arrived, everything was ready. When it was my time to weld, I did. But I also did other chores. I told them, "Talk to the boss. I don't know anything about union or these matters. Let me just get back to work. I came here to work, not to debate rules." And then after 12:30 at night, when the shift was done, the foreman would ask, "Quintanilla, 2 more hours?" I'd say, "2 more hours? Yes, let's do it. That's what I came to work for." Later on, some coworkers said I was brown nosing. We call it barbero. And I said, say whatever you want. I came here to work because I have a family to support and I need the money. They would say, "No, we aren't staying late." There were about 8 of us on the night shift, and they'd say, "We're leaving." I said, "Go ahead." I stayed behind by myself, and that's how I learned to operate the massive overhead cranes and move the rail cars. I also learned how to pull dents out of the tanks all by myself. I figured out how to do it all up there. I learned the whole system. Yes, Dad, you did learn the entire system. Yes. And they would tell me, "This tank has to go out." you're staying. And if you finish it in less than the 4 hours of overtime, you can go home and I will still pay you
Ajá.
for all 4 hours. Yes, Dad.
Sí.
I never knew where the foreman went during those hours, but he'd say, just finish up and go. Sometimes it took me only 2 hours, but I made sure to inspect it, grind it, weld it, and whatever was needed, I did it. That's why today, son,
Ujú. No.
today I say, son, why worry? Just focus on your job. Do your work well. Whatever they entrust you to do it right.
No,
Son,
no,
I
no.
can't complain.
Claro,
No,
o sea, usted
not
siempre
at all,
tuvo el
Dad.
deseo de trabajar y
You
sí, la
always had a
unión está
desire
ahí
to
para
work. And
proteger
yes, the
al
union is
obrero,
there to
¿verdad?
protect
Porque
the
sí hay
workers
gente,
because some
parece ser
employers,
de
like
que
Mr.
el
Alonso, Don
señor Alonso, se
Alonso,
llamaba señor
would abuse
Alonso,
their power and demand too
eh,
much.
abusaba,
But you weren't focused on the
¿verdad?
rules when you got to the United
Bueno,
States.
abusaba queriendo
You were
más.
focused on your
Y por
dedication
eso
and your
la unión
ambition.
está para proteger al trabajador, ¿verdad? Y claro, algunos empleadores
Yes,
abusan.
the union helped a
Y en su
lot.
caso, pero
I
usted, claro,
know they
usted
helped
no
me
iba
tremendously.
por las leyes
Mr.
ni nada, usted
Garza,
iba para
he
trabajar, era su
he
dedicación,
was
era
a very
su
good man.
ambición,
He
pero
he
sí,
spoke very good
las uniones sí
Spanish,
existen
and
¿verdad?
his
Claro, sí
partner,
hay
an
empleadores de
American
que se
woman,
pasan con los
was also
empleados
very
y
kind to
claro,
me.
ellos necesitan
My
las
foremen
protecciones de las
were always
uniones.
good to me, and I am so grateful to them. I thank them a lot because they allowed me to get to where I am. Then that work ended. The company unfortunately ended up closing down. They,
Yeah, yeah,
for
yeah.
whatever reason, they they ended up going bankrupt. So so I ended up going to look for work as a mechanic, which is where I stay, which is where I started my career in mechanics. I chose the hardest branch, heavy diesel engines.
El diesel.
Yes, changing
Los motores de diesel.
transmissions is and differentials and clutches. I did all of that. I even changed the trailer boxes, repaired the hydraulic lift pistons, and installed the power takeoffs, the PTOs. I did all those heavy, grueling jobs. And if Juanito Velasquez is still alive, that man also helped me so much. Even though sometimes he would get angry with me because he was a diabetic, um, but we appreciated each other. He always
Sí, sí, sí.
sought me out to do side jobs outside of the company to make a little extra money on the
Hacer un
side.
poco más de dinero.
For me, there was no hours, son. I never said no. And I thank God for your mother, whether she was sick or however she felt. She never sent me to work without a lunchbox.
Ujú.
Never, ever. She always made my lunch. I worked in several major companies like the Richmond Tank, the Union Tank, uh,
La Union
the
Tank.
Dynamic Produce.
Ujú.
And I thank God he helped me, and I was never fired from a job. Never. I was never let go for being lazy.
Yeah.
Once they wanted to lay me off because of my love for Mexico never faded.
Quería ir a ver a sus padres.
I always wanted to go see my parents. I would drive straight through without sleeping. It was very rare for me to sleep on the road from Houston to the ranch. Even after working a 12-hour shift, my love was for my parents.
Y los hemos
And how I thank God, son, that He protect us from accidents, and we saw them happen. Dad, yes, I remember. I said, do you remember that one time coming from Houston near the town of Falfurrias? Yes, Falfurrias, I remember.
Yeah.
I remember that too, Dad. At 12 midnight, horrible accident right before
Justo
we
antes de
got
que
there.
llegáramos nosotros.
Exactly. No, God has been with us all these years.